Good morning, everyone. Welcome back. This is the second meeting of the Goal 9 Target Industries Approach Rulemaking. I'm Lee McIlvain, Economic Development Specialist with the Department of Land Conservation and Development. I'm here with several colleagues who I'll have identify themselves quickly. Gordon, why don't you go ahead?
Hello all. Welcome this morning, and looking forward to the second meeting of our group. And I'll turn it back over to Lee.
Gordon. Let's see, Casaria?
Hi, good morning, everyone. Casaria Taylor, Rules Coordinator for the agency. Thanks, Lee.
Thanks. Alexis, I'll give you a chance to say hello. I know you're traveling right now, but feel free to.
Yeah, thanks, Lee. Yeah, and good morning. My name is Alexis Hammer. I'm the Legislative and Policy Manager.
Thank you. And we're also joined this morning by Commissioner Ellen Porter, who's our commission liaison to this rulemaking.
Hi, thank you, Lee, and Lee gave the introduction. I'm the liaison for the LCDC. Ellen Porter, thank you.
Thank you. Just for everyone's awareness, this meeting is being recorded and is currently live streaming on DLCD's YouTube channel. Before we do another quick round of introductions today, we'll be resharing information about meeting accommodations. So to make this meeting more accessible for all participants, I will be reading and describing each slide in its entirety where possible so that the content is clear for everyone. This slide is titled Welcome Back, Accessibility Accommodations for RAC members who are blind or visually impaired. It contains 6 bullet points describing strategies, participant etiquette, and techniques we'll be using during our meeting. I'll now read those bullet points. We ask that all participants state your name every time before you make a comment, even if you are mid-discussion. Slides will be read or described before any additional context or discussion is provided. Meeting participants are requested to remain on mute unless they're speaking. Chat will not be enabled between participants during the meeting, but participants may send a direct message to DLCD staff who are hosting the meeting. Please do not use Zoom reactions in response to polling types of inquiries from staff. We'll request a verbal response. And please raise your hand to participate in the discussion, and facilitators will recognize people to speak. Are there any questions about meeting accommodations before we continue with our committee reintroductions? Great. So we'll do quick introductions again today because I know that we have at least one new committee member with us and probably some others who were unable to join for our first meeting. This slide is titled Introductions. It includes 3 bullet points asking that participants please share your name, the organization you are affiliated with or interest you represent to this rulemaking, and an icebreaker question: what is an organ-based business that you would like other people to know about? For the icebreaker, feel free to name a favorite product, an important local employer in your community, an innovator or a business that's just been a constant presence in your community. And if you want to make a plug for them, feel free to put their business info in the chat. I can start. Lee McIlvain, Economic Development Specialist with DLCD, and an organ-based business that I would like you all to know about that I patronize more often than I should is Momo Cocoa, which is a small hot chocolate producer based in Washington County that makes really interesting cocoa packets, including cardamom cocoa. I'll go ahead and call on people to save time. I know we've already introduced our DLCD staff people and commission liaison Porter, but if you'd like to share a business with us, please go ahead. Ellen, why don't you go ahead first?
Well, thank you. You know, I was hoping that I wouldn't. Off the top. Off the top, I'm not coming up with anything. Can you come back to me, please?
Certainly. Gordon?
Well, Nothing's coming up the top either. I could say a lot of different local restaurants I like. I'll try Tada Sushi Studio in Lake Oswego. How's that?
Sounds great. Casaria, do you have a business that you'd like to share?
I'm in the same boat as everybody else, sorry.
I know I'm putting pressure on my DLCD colleagues to give our RAC members a little bit of extra time. Alexis.
Oh, geez. Well, I want to list my wife's nursery, Hummingbee Nursery, that sells plants for your garden, and it's available in grocery stores in Symbiop in Portland.
Thank you. Okay, going down the list, Andrea, could you please share your name, organization you're affiliated with, and a business that you would like other people to know about?
Yeah, absolutely. So good morning, everybody. Andrea Kloss. I'm the executive director for the Port of the Dalles in lovely The Dalles, Oregon. And so I would be remiss not to say Oregon Cherry Growers, which is now Pacific Coast Producers. And one of the items that comes out of the Dalles are the cherries for Cherry Garcia ice cream. So if you love Cherry Garcia ice cream, you are also supporting the Dalles, Oregon.
Thank you. I do love Cherry Garcia ice cream. Let's see, could we go to Adam Stein, please?
That's my alias. It's my husband. This is Nellie McAdams
Hi, Nellie.
from Farmland First. And I would say that the business that first came to mind was Stallbush Island Farm, which is just across the Willamette from Corvallis, and not only grows vegetables, but packages them and does value added and contributes a lot to the economy there.
Thank you. Allie Camp, please.
Hey there, Ellie Camp, City of Springfield's Economic Development Manager. A lot of people don't know this, but based in Springfield, we have a company called Rosen Sun Visor Systems. They make aviation sun visors, and they are the leading producer in the world for these systems that get installed in planes all over the world.
I did not know that. Let's go to Anthony Reeder, please.
Hey there, everyone. My name is Anthony Reeder. I use he, him pronouns. I am a project manager and the zoning code administrator, as well as doing some work in the policy space here at the city of Hillsborough. We have a number of great businesses in the city of Hillsborough. One of my favorite, much to the detriment perhaps of my waistline, is Blue Moon Bakery, which is a producer of gluten-free deliciousness. And they recently expanded from just a production facility to a brick and mortar, just south of downtown Hillsborough. So they're pretty great.
Thanks for sharing. Beth Goodman, please.
My name is Beth Goodman. I'm with Echo Northwest, a consulting firm or consultant who works with cities on EOAs fairly often. Blackstone Audio, they are out of Ashland and they do wonderful audiobooks for so many things. So there you go. And then to throw a second one in, Eugene has Euphoria chocolate, which is awfully good too.
Thank you. Bill?
Hi all, Bill Reed, Finance Director for City of North Plains. I guess I'll give a shout out to Abbey Creek Winery, North Plains own winery, one of the northernmost actually in Oregon. It's part of the Tualatin Hills, the new Tualatin Hills appellation that includes the North Plains area, but certainly goes a little bit north of that. And his primary manufacturer, his vineyard's up a little bit north of us off of Old Germantown Road, but he does all of his manufacturing in North Plains in our little downtown, which Bertoni, the owner, calls North Plains' financial district. It's about 2 blocks, so I love his sense of irony. But anyway, he's a very, very valuable, wonderful business and has great hip hop and wine parties and group events on the weekends in North Plains downtown. So definitely worth mentioning him.
Thank you. Brian Pohl, please.
Good morning, everyone. Brian Pohl, Community Development Director for the City of Forest Grove. I would give a shout out to Sake One, which is in Forest Grove and is the only sake brewery in Oregon, and one of the very few in all of the United States. And also just really cool people there. I don't drink sake, but I heard it's great for people who do like it.
I actually considered naming Sake One as my icebreaker answer. So yeah, seconded. How about Caroline, please?
Hi, good morning. Caroline Irvin with the City of Prineville, and we have a relatively new pipe manufacturer that produces pipe for example for the irrigation modernization projects that we're seeing around Central Oregon. And so that's Craw Pipe and located at the City of Prineville Railways Freight Depot. So that's my company.
Thanks. Dave, Honeycutt?
Good morning, everyone. Dave Honeycutt, Oregon Property Owners Association. My wife and I absolutely love Eric at Midas in Hillsborough. We have challenging cars, and he seems to be able to fix all of them. So if you're in Hillsborough and you need car repair, talk to Eric at Midas.
Great recommendation. Denise, please.
Denise Stillwell, South Central Oregon Economic Development Director. I'm the executive director here for Klamath and Lake counties, and I'm really concerned. I feel like a parent right now if I single out any one of the businesses. They'll all be mad, so I just a shout out to all the mom and pop businesses in both counties.
Frederica, you're up.
Can anyone hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Okay, my name is Frederica, but y'all could call me Fred. I am a concerned citizen, but I belong to the National Federation of the Blind, the American Council of the Blind, and a religious order called Daughters of the King. I would say my favorite restaurants is Cascadia Coffee that's in my apartment building, and it's in Building C. They really do wonderful coffee. And Riverside Cafe, my dragon boat team that I'm on, they always go there after practice along the riverfront on South Harbor Way. And they do excellent dirty chais. I love their dirty chais.
That sounds great.
Thank you.
Thanks for sharing. Heather King, please.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Heather King. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the executive director of the Columbia Slough Watershed Council. And I am going to give a shout out to two different businesses. One is Level Beer, which has several breweries in Portland, and they're currently selling Earth to Beer, which is a nationwide Earth Month initiative, and all the proceeds from that beer are going to my watershed council. So you should go buy yourself a 4-pack or a 6-pack or whatever. And then the other one is Crafted from Scratch, which is a local small business that makes really cool stickers and T-shirts. And they're also a sponsor of the organization that I work for.
Thanks for sharing. Jacqueline.
Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me?
We can.
All right. I'm Jacqueline Disney. I'm the Community and Economic Development Director for the Oregon Cascades West Council of Governments, serving the counties of Lynn, Lincoln, and Benton County. We are also staffing the Cascades West Economic Development District, which includes those 3 counties, as well as Lane County. So the question about Oregon business or a business that I would recommend, so a friend of mine has started a company called Emergent 3D. They do 3D concrete printed housing. They originated in Northern California, and I was just informed that they are negotiating projects in Medford. And I would love to see the potential for that technology to enter the other areas of Oregon because it offers climate resilient housing. They did the first on-site 3D printed housing in partnership with one of the cities down in Northern California for wildfire recovery victims. So I think this has great potential for us in this area to do on-site housing development printed from concrete. So you see something a little more resilient and climate friendly. So that's something I'd like to see. Give a shout out. So check out Emergent 3D online.
Thanks. And please feel free to put links in the chat if you'd like to share with other people. Let's go to Jay. Jay Blake, you are on mute if you're speaking.
I thought I pressed the button. Apologize. Jay Blake, Clatsop County, planning manager here. I originally was going to reach a new apex here and mention 9 breweries in downtown Astoria, but I chose to instead mention Columbia Memorial Hospital, which is the second largest employer in the area, and they are embarking on a $1.7 million expansion project, and it's the largest construction project planned for the city of Astoria for the next year.
Jerry?
Yeah, I'm Jerry Johnson with Johnson Economics. So we're a consulting firm, work on a lot of EOAs for actually a lot of the people here. It's hard to pick a business without sort of hitting on one of the many jurisdictions we've worked in. So I'll just pick the local restaurant that opened up close to me recently, Sebastiani's Deli, Sicilian Deli in Selwood. Very good, but the real secret is they've got a spice mix. You should buy that when you're there. You only get it at the deli, and everything tastes better when you get home.
How about Matt?
Hi, good morning, everyone. Matt Krigi, Economic Development Manager for Washington County. So many great businesses in Washington County. My gosh, there's a long list, of course. One of my favorites though is La Popular Macatalan, which is they make a birria sauce. So if you know, there's like a birria craze. It's a sauce from Mexico. It's like rich and peppers and tomatoes, and it's super yummy. You can put it in all sorts of things. Really cool story too. They worked with some of our friends at Adelante Mujeres at the retail incubator there at Casa Cui. Brian's here. This is right in Forest Grove. It's a great place for local small businesses and in particular Latina businesses to get a start. I recommend that you go find that sauce. It's in Market of Choice now. The Forest Grove Farmers Market is also open on Wednesday evenings. I know they usually have a stand there, so go get some of that. It's such good stuff. So thanks.
Thanks, Matt. McCrae?
Sorry, it took me a moment to unmute. McCrae Carmichael with the Mid-Willamette Valley Council of Governments and Economic Development District. We represent Marion, Polk, and Yamhill County and are located in Salem. And I'm glad I got to go a little bit later because it allowed me to think at first. So I'm going to give 3. There's Mana Bakery, which were employees for Bodie Bakery in Corvallis. They've come to Salem. They were working the markets, the farmers markets, and they moved into a brick and mortar. And it's just so good for downtown. They make fantastic bread. Like, it's beautiful. They sell out at the mart. It's just lovely. It's a lovely addition to Salem. There's Minto Island Growers, which is a farm in Salem also. Just again, they grow a lot in the valley, for the valley. There's so many growers in all of our regions, but they also have lots of events. Their farm is very accessible. They do U-Pick. It's just a long-standing family. So they're one of just a personal favorite, but to the same accord, there's so many other farms I'd like to list. And then the last thing is Xena Forest in West Salem. They're part of the Portland Airport project. Their white oak is going to be the flooring. And they are just lovely people. And so it's so like, they work hard. I have their flooring from 15 years ago. They were a very small lumber. So I had white oak installed in my home. And so to see them now scale up to where they are is just fantastic. And then White Oak is so representative of the valley. So it's really special that it's landed at the airport. So I talked way too long. Thank you for getting to know some of my favorite businesses.
Thanks, McCray. And last but not least, Ted.
Good morning, Ted Reed, Metro Planning, Development, and Research. Let's see, how about a place I went to with my son this last weekend to see his cello teacher perform. It's Enzo Urban Winery in inner Southeast Portland. I think it's a nice example of the relationship between working landscape in the state and urban businesses, where it's a winery in a very urban area using grapes picked in rural areas.
Thanks, Ted. I love Enzo. Let's see. Should we go back to any colleagues from DLCD who were a bit tongue-tied at the beginning of this exercise? Commissioner Porter, did you want to come back in with a business recommendation? And you are muted. Well, folks can feel free to put things in the chat if they would like to. Let us proceed. This slide displays the agenda for our 3-hour meeting, so I'll now read that agenda. Early in the meeting, we've just completed introductions, and we're about to get into an overview of what's included in the packet. Following that, we will go over the example EOAs that were provided and linked from your packet, just to give a little bit of contextual discussion. And then we'll review the updated draft rule that was distributed in your packet, and then take a break at that point. Following the break, we will discuss the key questions and issues that were distributed during the first RAC meeting, and learn from you what you're hearing from the organizations and interests that you represent on those key questions. And then we'll wrap up this meeting hopefully at noon, if not before, with instructions or next steps for the RAC. Nellie, I see that your hand is raised. Please go ahead.
Thanks, Lee. I just heard from Gil over text that he is in the meeting and can see us, but he doesn't think that we can see him. So I just wanted to flag that technical issue.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Casaria, could you try to resolve the issue with Gil's participation?
Will do.
And, yeah, and let us know when he joins so that he can introduce himself, since he is new to our committee. While Casaria works on that, I'll just go ahead and provide an overview here of what you received in your packet for today's meeting. So this slide is titled Packet Materials, and it identifies each of the attachments that were included. The example EOAs, so your packet includes the March 21st, 2024 meeting minutes. It includes key questions and issues for consideration by the RAC. It includes the updated tentative rule language for your consideration. It also includes comments submitted by members of the RAC, and we received comments from Farmland First, the City of Hillsborough, and Stu Peterson on behalf of McAdam Forbes, who is not able to attend today. And then finally, it included an example target industries approach economic opportunities analysis summary table, where department staff did some work evaluating different approaches. The example economic opportunities analysis are available on DLCD's website. They're just too voluminous to distribute to the RAC over email. And it really is not expected that members of this committee review these in depth, but they are there for your reference on the Goal 9 rulemaking page if you would like to explore them further. DLCD received no corrections to the meeting minutes, and we did receive the 3 responses that you see on the slide here, requesting that those comments be included in the packet. But just as a reminder, you can send written comments for distribution to the other members of the Rulemaking Advisory Committee to Caseria at any time. There are deadlines to get them included in the packet, but we're always happy to distribute them as needed. Okay, Caseria, I see that Gil may have joined.
Gil has just joined, yes.
Thank you. Welcome, Gil. Apologies for the technical difficulties. I understand you were able to hear introductions from others. So would you like to introduce yourself? And I think you're on mute. I'm just confirming that I'm not the only person who cannot hear a response.
No,
Okay.
he is still on mute.
He's still on mute.
Yeah. Casaria, do you have the ability to unmute him?
I do not.
Okay.
Does that
Gil,
work?
Hey, there you are.
Oh, okay.
We can hear and see you. Thank you.
Okay.
Well, welcome to the Rulemaking Advisory Committee. Would you like to introduce yourself, state who you're representing, and identify a business?
There you are. Oh, okay.
We can hear and see you. Thank you.
Okay. Am I unmuted?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay.
Well, welcome to the Advisory Committee. Would you like to introduce yourself, state who you're representing, and identify a
Hey,
business?
Gil, do you want to mute your YouTube?
Okay. Sure. Am I unmuted?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay.
Well, welcome to the Advisory Committee. Would you like to introduce yourself, state who you're representing?
Do you want to mute your YouTube?
Okay. Sure. Am I unmuted?
Gil, if you're having audio issues, I think maybe the best approach would be to go on mute until you can sort out the
Yeah.
speaker versus microphone issue. And feel free to introduce yourself by responding to our prompts in the chat. Thank you. Okay, so we're going to approach the packet materials a little bit backward today, starting with the example target industries approach EOAs. So this slide displays the 6 questions used to analyze the sample EOAs that were distributed to the RAC. And included in your meeting packet was a table that summarized several example target industries approach EOAs that were provided by 2 practitioners who are represented on our RAC. So for the purpose of providing additional background information on the target industries approach, agency staff evaluated these EOAs on the following questions. So we looked at how specifically the target industry was defined, what was the total land need identified through the EOA, what type of rationale was provided for the site needs, how did the target industry relate to employment growth forecasted in the EOA, whether there were local measures protecting target industry sites in the EOA, and then we also asked the question of whether the target industry has developed yet. This slide displays the table distributed in your packets, evaluating those target industries approach EOAs, and I do apologize for the font size. It was just it's kind of one of those impossible presentation materials, but we'll go over it in detail. So the economic opportunities analyses linked from your packet include North Plains, Hillsborough, Sisters, Springfield, and Junction City, and these are the headers that you can see on the columns here. Evaluation of these EOAs reveals a range of approaches in how the target industry's approach is applied, and that's informative for how we structure the rule to provide clarity around this method. I can start off by sharing what we learned from the first row, which displays the types of industries identified as targets in each EOA, and where possible, I've included the number of NAICS or North American Industry Classification digits, indicating how specific those industries are. There was a fairly even distribution of industries defined at the 2, 3, or 4-digit NAICS level, with outliers on each end, grouping together multiple 2-digit NAICS categories in the case of North Plains, or even identifying specific potential employers in the case of Junction City. Typical target industries tend to fall within manufacturing and healthcare and medical services, but as you're able to see on this table in your packet, there really is a wide variety of industries that communities target as desirable for growth. In the second row, the total land need identified through the target industries approach. This was more difficult to answer because not all EOAs that use the target industries approach identify a specific site in that economic opportunities analyses. So many EOAs will aggregate the target industry job growth and land need with other similar industries as an overall conclusion to that analysis. The next row, this is the fourth row down, shows the types of rationale that these economic opportunities analyses provide for site needs. And although I can't say that this sample is representative of all EOAs, these particular EOAs overwhelmingly rely on Business Oregon, specifically using the industrial site requirements matrix that was distributed with your packet for our first committee meeting. However, some EOAs also model site needs on what they're observing in nearby communities. They use specific industry reports or conduct interviews with local businesses. The next row seeks to answer how each of these economic opportunities analyses accounted for employment growth. The great majority of the example EOAs assign additional expected employment growth in the target industry to appropriate economic sectors in the forecast, which is normally based on safe harbor sources such as the Oregon Employment Department, and then elevate that forecast based on what the city expects to result from its efforts in growing that target industry. EOAs that use the target industries approach in this manner to translate aspiration to job growth then have a fairly straightforward task ahead to convert that additional job growth to additional land need. The next row describes whether the economic opportunities analysis identified or recommended methods for preserving sites for target industry uses. This is really, it is not as common, and it is possible that some of these cities already had adopted policies that preserve key sites, but that policy isn't included as a recommendation in the EOA. Hillsborough, for example, has specialized industrial zones for some high-tech manufacturing facilities already established. But you can see that the only economic opportunities analysis that included a recommendation for site preservation out of this sample is the city of Springfield, which included a recommendation to preserve sites of a certain size for those uses. And then finally, we looked briefly into whether the target industry actually developed. And before we jump to any conclusions about it, I would just remind people that an economic opportunities analysis seeks to provide a 20-year supply of employment land, and that industrial development in particular takes more time than other forms of development. So what I was able to conclude is that in Junction City, which had a very specific target industry, including state prison and I think a grain products manufacturing operation, as well as state hospital. Of those target industries, the state hospital developed, but others have not yet. In Hillsborough, there has been development of several data centers and some manufacturing operations that were targeted within that 2015 economic opportunities analysis. And then for others, it's sort of difficult to conclude because there are so many target industries, or it's a quite recent economic opportunities analysis, and the results will not be proven for several years to come. So this information was provided in response to questions from several members of the committee during our last meeting, and I'm curious how it lands, or if committee members have questions about what we have here. Please go ahead, Ted.
Thank you, Ted Reed, Metro Regional Planning. So yeah, this got my gears turning on the question about specificity of the types of sites needed for these target industries. And I know I brought up at the last meeting the question about whether we were talking about just industrial uses, and I noted in some of the red line you've excluded retail, for instance, from this approach. So just bringing up that question about are there other things that should be excluded that don't necessarily have very unique site needs? So other commercial uses come to mind.
Yeah, thank you for the comment. We will get a little bit more into the department's evolving definition of target industry and what can be used in this, but I think it's helpful to remember that just because something is identified as a target industry doesn't necessarily mean that the land need determination is based on some very specific site needs. So in fact, it's more likely that the more target industries the city has, the more you see its land need aggregated into some kind of overall community and economic development vision. So it's not, I think in some cases, it's not necessary to say that some of these uses are applying a target industries approach, because it's not necessarily the case in their land need determination. In response to your question about industrial versus other uses, I think as you can see here, there are many types of economic activities or growth aspirations that a community might have that are not necessarily an industrial or typical manufacturing type activity. And so the department is trying to be cognizant of that in its recommendations. Let's see, I see hands going up and down. I'm just going to call on the first one that I see, and that's Beth.
So I was a primary author on the Springfield and the Junction City EOAs. What I will say, there's obviously a difference between the two of them, with Junction City being super specific. Because they knew who the potential user was for the non-state site, which was Grain Millers. And Grain Millers had really specific site needs. So it was much easier to do that kind of analysis. Springfield was we connected it much more with the growth forecast than we did. We kind of connected it with the growth forecast, if I'm remembering right, in Junction City. This was a very long time ago. But I would say the key question we were trying to answer in both of these is, how do you, look at the future being different than the past? So how can you change, provide opportunity to change where your local economy is going? So that was underlying in both of them.
Thanks for the context. And that was Beth Goodman with Echo Northwest. It's okay. We'll all get back into the habit. Gil, I believe you're next.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, good. I had a problem plugging in. I can do an introduction later whenever it's convenient. But a question here. I read through in detail the two most recent ones, the North Plains and the Sisters, and I think Jerry was involved in as a consultant on both of those. And hi, Jerry. I've known Jerry for quite a while. I guess one question that raised, and there were a number of questions which I think we can get to as the agenda moves forward, but just in terms of the North Plains, which was as opposed to the one that was just described for Springfield, which was fairly specific sites and so forth. The North Plains was aspirational largely beyond what I think Jerry documented in terms of more immediate needs for commercial space. The industrial was more aspirational. And I guess it raised a question in my mind about whether there are regional considerations that should be taken in, including some level of alternatives analysis. Within the Metro UGB, I think there's a need, Ted, and hello, Ted, for that kind of look. As you get to outside the Metro jurisdiction around the state, I'm just wondering about, there was certainly this notion around what is surrounding business activity in the industry clusters that you're looking at. But in terms of a sort of site analysis and options for sites, particularly for large UGBs expansions like the North Plains one, so what is the regional consideration around aspirational target industry aspirations that then turn into really relatively large UGB expansion requests or proposals? So that goes to both the analysis and the decision-making process, I guess. I'll hold other concerns on employment densities and so forth and so on till later in the conversation. But that was one that was raised for me just by reading the analyses, which I thought were quite cogent, Jerry.
Thank you, Gil. When you speak, could you please share the organization that you represent? And I'll go ahead. That's Gil Kelly representing 1,000
Oh,
Friends
sure.
of Oregon.
Yeah, I'm here representing 1,000 Friends of Oregon today.
Thanks. I have some thoughts in response to your questions about regional considerations, but it seems like this might be a good moment for Bill to jump in. If you have any responses to Gil's inquiry or your own train of thought to share.
Yeah, thank you. Bill Reed, Finance Director for City of North Plains. Yeah, no, I guess where I would start was I think something that's critical in our EOA that's not obvious in this table, I think, and maybe it's not coming across in the reading of it because it's I think the word voluminous was used earlier for EOAs. Ours isn't alone in that case. But we actually tasked Jerry Johnson and his office to look very closely and in a targeted way, take a look at the industry mix, specifically in the North Hillsborough area, north of Highway 26, between Cornelius Pass Road and Brookwood. And in that area, if you're familiar with it, is a wide variety of industries of various sizes and types that have located there because Hillsborough is a great place to do business. Shout out to our neighbors in Hillsborough. But it's a wide variety because it was a large area of availably planned industrial land. And so we have box manufacturers, we have food manufacturing there. We have quite a few semiconductor supply chain firms, whether they admit it or not. We have some business park in there that has a wide variety of smaller industrial users, office uses, that sort of thing, different sectors in there. And our logic was that area is just about out of land. But they are all rapidly growing industries. And they're the next freeway stop down from the first freeway stop to get to North Plains. So when the targeted industries information in this table cites all industrial use, that's not completely true because it's really all industrial use with the prime example we're targeting of the industrial mix that's in that very specific geography in Hillsborough north of Highway 26. And this, my city manager and I back in 2021, I do believe, Spring Day, we went out and photographed the area extensively. We wanted to show how different industries look, feel, what types, what their development forms look like, how paths, streets work together, how they can be near a high school and still work and be okay. And that kind of got the ball rolling in city council seeing that yeah, it makes sense to take a look at how North Plains can be a continuation of growth, and these groupings of industry would be appropriate to target because we have nothing right now. We don't have existing industry to assume is going to continue to grow. We don't have an existing job base of these industries that we can do an employment forecast in a reasonably practical way. So we kind of had to take a look at the closest geography we had to an industry mix within it and model how can we be a place for these vital industries to continue to grow. And so that's the basis of it. So there is some specificity, I think, that maybe the table doesn't quite get at, but that's fundamental to what we did.
Thanks for that response, Bill. I just think that reinforces my question about whether there's a broader regional look for some of these issues, but thank you.
And I think you raise a great question, Gil, frankly, because is this probably gets later, but I think you raised the question, does a target industries approach need to apply differently to different types of urban growth boundaries? North Plains and a few others on this committee have their own urban growth boundary, and we have to go through a process that frankly is the reverse in terms of examining and planning urban growth boundary expansion than what the Portland Metro region needs to do. So that actually raises that question, and I have that question myself. Can we expect this process and these rules to apply equally and the same to all jurisdictions, whatever type of urban growth boundary they have?
Thanks.
Nellie, please go ahead.
Thanks, Lee. Nellie McAdams with Farmland First. I think Bill raises a good question. It is one that I had for maybe Ted Reed as well. Maybe that's later. But what are the distinctions between the process for EOAs being developed inside Metro versus outside Metro? I'm just curious to learn about that. And then I'm also curious, Lee, there are a number of different industries listed for under these EOAs. Are their land requests additive, or are they the alternative, or does it depend? I'm just trying to wrap my mind around in some ways why target industries approach, whether intentional or not, seems to result in larger land requests, and how maybe industry stacking or alternatives choicing plays into that.
Thanks, Nellie. I can go ahead and quickly answer your question on EOAs inside versus outside of the metro regional urban growth boundary. There is no difference in terms of cities' requirements to comply with the Division 9 rules that provide a process for an economic opportunities analysis inside or outside of Metro. The difference is really in how the employment lands expansion process takes place. So I think that's from the state's perspective there, and within Division 9, there's really no distinction there. And then Nellie, you also asked if land requests are through the target industries approach are additive, or if it's an alternative way of assessing the amount of land. And I think that there's not a straightforward answer to that.
Yeah, I would say like the alternative piece is like, is it, like semiconductors or, box manufacturing, it's like as you're listing out the industries, is it casting a wide net for anything that might come? Is it listing all the ones that you do want? I mean, I can see that in a 20-year forecast that would happen. I'm just sort of wondering how that plays out in the actual request.
It really depends on how specifically a target industry is defined, to answer your question. Yeah. Jerry, you've had your hand up for quite a while.
Yeah, thanks. A couple pieces to follow up to Gil and Bill's discussion about sort of what's the role or how you deal with jurisdictions that are outside the metro area, but clearly are part of the broader metro regional economy. I do think one of the things to note is like for Metro, and Ted can correct me if I'm wrong, with the urban growth report, there's a significant portion of employment that's basically assumed to not be accommodated within the Metro UGB. And to some extent, I think that's fair game, of course, then to say that we aspire to get a significant share of that or some reasonable share of it. And I think the forecast that we came up with in North Plains, which is a very large growth rate for North Plains relative to their small base, is not a big number if they were part of the greater North Plains Hillsborough area. But North Plains really does have a small base, so it's very difficult to do that. One of the other things we're seeing on target industries, and these are going to be coming through you, Lee, in the next year, is we've got several in smaller jurisdictions where we actually have sort of the bird in hand. We have the employer, we have the industry. Not only can we forecast the industry, but we can give you engineering and site plans of exactly what they're going to be doing and where, and what their capital budget is and their planning process. And for that, we're doing it our approach has been to do as a target industry approach and say, look, we anticipate this industry, explain why the industry is working, why the industry is expected to expand, but we have real knowledge of actual projects. And so much as Beth did with Junction City, where you can be very specific because you know the employer. And some of these we can be very specific because we actually know the industry or the firm, not just the industry.
Thanks for that context. Fred Banks, we'll wrap up with your question here, and then we'll move into an overview of the new revisions to the draft rule. And I should state that all of these issues will have plenty of discussion time scheduled for after we take a break here. So give some folks a chance to digest what they're seeing here, what's included in the revision to the draft rule, and then we'll get into it. Please go ahead, Fred.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. One of the things that I was listening to, and I again was thinking of the North Plains area, above Highway 26, is that like whatever the different industries that are there in the financial and industrial district that is going on, I think one of the differences in your UGB development perhaps is to keep sort of a more suburban look to your businesses. But also thinking about that, people coming in, and thinking about environment, perhaps looking at how public transit could still keep to the feel of that area, but make it friendly enough and accessible enough for everyday people to access these businesses if they need to where it doesn't look, and it may not be about looks, but I'd say implementing something to where those people who work in those industrial or professional complexes are able to get to work without dealing with traffic or cars, using public transportation that could be developed that will work within your boundaries, within your town, that doesn't change it to where it doesn't look, in short, you could be an industrial bedroom community that looks aesthetic but is environmentally friendly and accessible to all. And I hope that that makes sense to people.
It does, and I think it is the objective of most folks on this call. So yeah, thank you. All right, I am going to move on to our updates to the draft rule. So pardon me while I switch my screen share. which oddly I cannot see. Can folks see a Word document with highlighting in front of them?
Yes.
Yes, okay. Having PowerPoint issues. And is it still visible?
Yes.
Great. Okay, thank you for the confirmation. So we'll do a walkthrough now of the revised rule. This is attachment number 4 if you wish to bring up an accessible version on your own screen. DLCD staff addressed some of the specific feedback that we received during and following the first committee meeting to make some changes, which I'll focus on as I guide folks through this. And you're welcome to ask clarifying questions as we go over the update. And then, like I said, we'll take a short break and come back to our key questions for an in-depth discussion on them. Most of those questions are aimed at informing the rule amendment. So if you've got a strong point of view on something that you see here that is good, please make note of it and we'll be able to discuss it in depth after the break. So let me scroll up to the top here. Is the text size workable for people? All right, I see a thumbs up from Beth. Thank you. So we made some changes both in response to internal agency needs as well as what we were hearing from the RAC. So let me scroll down first to our definition, which did not change at all from the first version that was shared with you. So we decided to stick with a 3-digit North American industry classification level based on that evaluation of the sample target industries approach EOAs that you saw, where we see a balance between anywhere from 2 to 4 digits of specificity. However, we have been advised that we need to include the year that this particular economic census was published for reasons that I cannot explain, but an attorney could. So, are there any questions about that? Please go ahead, Allie.
Are we discussing these now, or are we?
I would like to save any topical discussion that you have for after the break that we take, and there will be time set aside specifically to talk about our level of digits and restrictions of industries and that sort of thing. But if you have questions about what you see, it's good to clear them up now.
Yeah, I think my topics are discussion related.
Okay, great. And all right, so moving on to the next changes. I included this small amendment here. This is largely symbolic of a number of revisions that are going to be made to the more administrative and codified components of this rule. So I guess this is the process that all state agencies go to. I'm new to this, but if you see in the final draft rule many changes to each of these sections, that's just getting us current with references to any changes in statute. So it won't be substantive in terms of what we've talked about here. We have already talked about the inclusion of target industries within the process for conducting an economic opportunities analysis. So this is not new to the group, but just to review, it does invoke a regional consideration here, Gil, to answer your question. So cities and counties are strongly encouraged to analyze trends and establish employment projections in a geographic area larger than the planning area and determine the percentage of employment growth. And we're inserting here and target industries reasonably expected to be captured for the planning area. So that's a change. Beth, please go ahead.
Beth Goodman with Go Northwest. My question is actually on the next one, so I apologize for being a little premature.
Okay.
But my question on the next one is I'm hoping we get into what does that mean,
Mhm.
the next highlight, because it could be read very broadly.
Okay. We will get into that. Thank you. And Gil?
Unmute there. Maybe just a marker for discussion afterwards, but I appreciate your reference here to looking at the trends in a larger geographic area. And my points are really around how allocation of that regional demand gets located, particularly if it's one jurisdiction in a proximity or a cluster of that, the remainder of that geographic area. So it's not just the baseline analysis of trends, but also what's involved in the decision criteria around actually locating and how much. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. It's a good comment. I am not sure it's within the rulemaking charge provided us by the commission, but it's certainly worth discussion. As Beth noted, there's a question here of how an EOA can demonstrate how expected employment growth is expected to be accommodated on identified sites, and we'll certainly be getting to this in depth. And I'm just going to scroll to our next change. So we're getting now out of the section that provides a process for an economic opportunities analysis and into section 20 of Division 9, which provides for required and recommended industrial and other employment development policies. And designation of lands for industrial and other employment uses. This is section 25 of Division 9. And we have some significant changes to our recommended draft language from the first meeting. If folks recall, we looked at this section that provides a process for identification of needed sites to accommodate future employment opportunities, and we sort of divided this up into two sections. So as of the last meeting, we said, okay, there'll be two processes for identifying sites. One is for identifying sites related to some kind of safe harbor employment growth forecast. And then the second section, this is new language in subsection B here, says that plans may include sites for one or more target industries. And then we're going to introduce some changes here because what we have done is state that cities may identify more than one target industry. They may cluster similar target industries together for the purposes of site identification. So this was in response to the feedback that we received that it's impossible for some specific three-digit level defined industries to be predicted and really what the eventual industrial development outcome is going to be. So it's acceptable per this new revision to the rule to cluster several similar industries together for the purposes of site identification through the target industries approach. We continue to have this language in the proposed rule, which is that target industry site needs should sort of be confirmed or coordinated at least with business organ, and that could include the industrial site requirements matrix that folks customarily include in many economic opportunities analysis or confirmation from business organ. Although I should mention that DLCD is in the process of coordinating with business organ right now to make sure that that agency finds this reference and plan to be acceptable. And then another change here is that we introduce this language stating that sites identified through the target industries approach may not be planned for retail development. And I will respond to questions now. Anthony, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. So I really appreciate the upcoming inclusion of kind of clusters of different related target industries. I'm wondering if there's any kind of follow-on work to be done about how related industries are defined. I'm just trying to think through what might become grounds for a potential appeal or legal action down the road, and just giving communities the opportunity to cluster without having to, they need to make, I would assume, some findings about why they're related, but how, like, to what extent, and who decides what's related and what's not.
Yeah, thank you. That's a great comment. And I think when we should discuss after the break, when we get to our sort of definition of target industries. And just for everyone's benefit, that was Anthony Reeder with the City of Hillsborough. And a reminder to everyone to please introduce yourself before you speak. And Gil, please go ahead.
Thanks, Lee. A question here, and is really just a question of information. If we have some questions or concerns about site requirements by industry type, is that really a discussion to be had with the business development department, or is that part of the scope of the discussion here? In other words, around, site and area needs for specific kinds of industries. When you're at the 3-digit level, there still can be a lot of variation, of course. And so I have some questions around being all about economic development. I'm also about efficient use of land. Obviously, that's a big question for 1,000 Friends on this, because we support economic development, but also want efficient use of land. And so without getting this group lost in the weeds in terms of specific employment densities and acreages and employment by square foot or acre, whatever. Is that a discussion really with business development department? That's one question. The second one is just on the next paragraph on total land supply. Land supply in the definitions place is both vacant and developed, which would include lightly or underdeveloped, I guess, in my mind. And so is that part of the analysis here for target industry approach?
Yeah, thanks. Excellent questions both. To respond to your question regarding total land supply, this is not a section of the rule that the commission has directed us to make changes to. And that being said, consideration of vacant, developed, and redevelopable lands applies equally to industries identified through the target industries approach or forecasted for growth through safe harbor sources.
Okay, thanks.
And then thank you for asking the question about business organs' potential role as described here. The vision, I think, from DLCD staff, and I hope that this makes sense to others, it's definitely open for discussion after the break, is that business organ could provide a validation of some kind to say, okay, like your target industry site needs that you have asserted in your economic opportunities analysis are typical of what we might see for this industry or what we have seen developing in the state or, in similar communities, something like that. But it would not be up to business organ to review an economic opportunities analysis. For example, a land use advocacy organization that found itself to be in disagreement with a target industries approach, EOA, would not appeal that information to business organ. It is still a land needs discussion focused within the Department of Land Conservation and Development.
But even starting out, a city could consult with business organ on those kinds of specifics and get a judgment call or an opinion from them as part of their analysis.
Yeah, that's right. And I think as an added benefit, it involves business organ in long-range economic development planning at a very early stage.
Thank you.
Beth?
Beth Goodman with Echo Northwest. I would just flag that it would be helpful to define what typical site characteristics are. That comes out of my concerns, I think, related probably to the Newberg case from years ago around necessary and typical. So I don't know who gets to define typical. Like, for instance, I think when you're looking for sites that are large enough and in a single ownership or maybe two ownerships is important. And if you ask a site selector, they'll certainly talk about the need not to aggregate a bunch of smaller sites into a larger site. But in looking at the literature, I could never find anything that talked about that. So you can kind of get hung up on those kind of things.
Yeah, thank you for the comment. It's an important distinction. Andrea.
Hi, Andrea Klossport of the Dows. So continuing to look at B, where it references consistency with Oregon Business Development Department guidance, that seems really vague. And since we're trying to sort of like tighten up what those actual reference points are, since we said the 2022 NAICS code that we're going to be looking at, I feel like guidance is vague. We're looking at this every 5 years. So this should be, there should be much more specificity tied to this, or at least a point to the document that could be referenced for this.
Thank you for the comment. It's a difficult line to walk on being overly prescriptive and flexible. So, Jerry, please go ahead.
Yeah, I would actually, to follow on with Andrea's point, I think there's broader, there's more sources in Business Oregon. I think not to discount Business Oregon, but a lot of the industries, one, they don't update that very often, and the industries change quickly, and the needs change quickly. And secondarily, we may have a very specific, we talk about 3-digit SIC, that's actually pretty specific. Probably more specific than I think most economic development people would prefer. But as you get into 3-digit, there's a lot of industries that aren't going to be covered, and they'll have very specific needs and requirements and location, either locational or utilities or infrastructure. And I do think there's, it's good to have that as a source, but I wouldn't want it to be the only potential source.
Okay, thank you. And Fred? You're muted.
Hello?
We can hear you now.
Okay. In listening to all of this, one of my concerns is, definitely housing, surrounding, because people have to live, people would probably like to live where they work or near where they work. Affordable housing, of course, and accessibility for, development sites of these different target industries. And I know that, I asked a lot of questions in the previous one, about that. And I really think that it's very key that no matter what industry that's being considered, there are supporting industries such as retail, such as, housing and transportation, and all of that does require accessibility to some degree. And I just urge, when we're thinking about looking at this, making revisions, that we consider accessibility for people, even if that's not what we're doing. We basically, or if I will, I will, add that into my suggestions.
Thank you for adding that perspective.
Thank you.
Okay, I am gonna scroll on. And we are now at the section related to, let me find our header here. Sorry, scrolling back and forth. We are still in designation of lands for industrial and other employment uses. And this is a brand new section of the rule as of the first meeting, and quite heavily modified for this meeting of the committee. to provide a process for preserving and designating sites identified for target industry uses. So what we have added here since the last meeting of this committee is both some flexibility in the potential uses that might develop on the site and also some protections for what might develop on the site. And so sub A here basically says that, and this is response to feedback that we received from the committee, that we should have some flexibility in these sites, but that there should be a method of considering whether that development is appropriate. So we're proposing that sites designated for target industries may be developed for unanticipated employment uses based upon adopted findings that the proposed non-target industry offers equal or higher local economic benefit. So that allows cities to allow a target industry site to develop with another but equally or more valuable potential use that they did not anticipate through their target industries approach in their EOA. Subsection B here essentially provides some zoning restrictions and prevents a target industry site zoned for industrial use from being rezoned to commercial or residential use. And then a target industry site that is zoned for a different type of employment use cannot be rezoned for residential use. That being said, we know that sometimes cities will be left with land on hand that just is not developing in the way that they had anticipated at the time that they conducted their economic opportunities analysis. So if a city would like to downzone their target industry site for a completely different type of use than they imagined, and most specifically for residential development, then they will need to conduct another economic opportunities analysis that demonstrates that land is no longer necessary for employment use. Beth.
Beth Goodman with Echo Northwest. Again, I have a question about a definition. In section little a, big A, non-target industry use offers equal or higher local economic benefit. I'm just curious how a city would define that. Is that, more jobs than expected or higher wage jobs, or what that means exactly?
A good topic for discussion. Allie?
I have the same question as Beth. Thank you, Beth. Allie Camp, City of Springfield. Does local economic benefit include impacts to the property tax base?
Thank you. We will discuss that. And Gil?
Yeah, I have basically the same question as the previous speakers, and I guess the example in my mind was a target industry approach that might be looking at, the tech sector or subsectors of the tech, and nothing happens for a while, and so it's then decided to be used as a regional distribution center, a transshipment center. Those are very different employment profiles, traffic profiles, and so on. So is that an allowable shift? I think we should think through some examples of how this works and on what are the consequences or protections.
Sounds like a practical approach. Thanks for the comment. And Bill, please go ahead.
Yeah, so, and this kind of gets at some of the specificity we're getting at with this and some of the site protection thinking. For a city with its own UGB anyway, this is just a question. What happens if this EOA is adopted? The comprehensive plan is amended and adopted. What happens if the GOLT 14 process after the fact finds that there's no suitable land for this site or these targeted industry sites. So I'm putting that out there, just generally speaking.
Thank you. It's a worrisome possible path. And Gil, I see that you still have your hand raised, but I'm not sure if it's a new question.
No, I just neglected to put it down. Sorry.
No worries. Andrea.
Thank you, Andrea Kloss, Port of the Dalles. So for consideration, I'm going to throw out, instead of economic benefit, maybe community benefit. And this kind of goes to some of the points that Frederica has been making over our last couple meetings, that there might be a bigger benefit, a different kind of benefit that's not necessarily economic, that could be considered. And then for my own edification, if a community wanted, I don't know how much an EOA costs. So what is that cost to a community if they decided they wanted to go through this process to change that zoning? You know, for some of the smaller communities, this could be a pretty big financial burden potentially. So I guess I'm just also reminding everybody that there is a cost to that.
Since we won't be getting at that in our questions after the break, I'll just go ahead and respond now. I see typical EOA bids for, we'll say, an average or median sized city in Oregon, anywhere between $40,000 to $100,000. So you're right, it is an expense for a city. And I do just want to add as context that the purpose of conducting this rulemaking is to provide more clarity so that those precious local funds are not spent in vain on a process that is likely to be appealed. So, you know, we really do want to be providing more clarity around this. And the other thing I would say is that a city does not have to use a target industries approach to assert land demand for employment uses in the future. It's not a requirement. Frederica, this will be, I think, our last question on the rules as structured, and then we'll go to a break and we can really get into some of these topics more in detail. Please go ahead, Fred.
All right. I wonder, is it possible for the target industries to collaborate, or perhaps to use more of a collaborative method? Like, say if there is an industry that's there, and then they find, oh, this doesn't exactly work for this community. However, this particular, say like manufacturing of wood pulp doesn't work. However, a data center will, with, retail and entertainment, industries involved in that, more, I'd say, community building, because like I said, we all have to shop for food and clothes and, utilitarian shopping, or just edification stuff, like nurseries or green spaces, parks, that really make the town look appealing, and of course, accessibility. And so is it possible for, the different things that we are looking at to find a level of collaboration that might have a EOA work on multiple levels? Does anyone understand my question?
Fred, I think you might be getting at some of the comments that were made earlier around, whether we're really talking about economic benefit or community benefit when we're considering how to plan for employment growth in the future. So I think that you are pointing out something useful. Yeah, the other response that I would make is that sometimes an economic opportunities analysis doesn't quite get down to the level of site design, but we are looking closely at site characteristics. And so I'm glad that you're bringing this perspective of accessibility, because I think that it could be considered much earlier in a site characteristics
Yeah.
type analysis. So thank you.
Mm.
All right, I see that there's some comments in the chat. I'm going to look at them over the break. And what I would like to do, Gil, unless you want to bring something in for just a moment before we break here.
Well, just real quick, looking at the protection sections here, you might consider adding a D clause under B. This is for discussion, obviously, by the group, but maintaining target industries site development in long-term capital plans. So it may be, 2-3 years before anything shows up, but often that's the big restriction there when, yeah, well, we'd like to do this, but sorry, there's no infrastructure on the horizon. So if it's intended for that, it seems like before a rezoning or chopping it up for smaller uses, that there's some long-term capital plan that's in place.
Thank you. All right, I'm going to give everybody a minute to get up and stretch, use the restroom, etc. Why don't we reconvene at 10:35, which is 7 minutes from now, and then we will get into some of these questions more in depth. So thank you very much. We'll see you soon.
Lee?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, I'm sorry. I looked at the last time's minutes and my name wasn't on the roster of people.
Oh, thank you for pointing that out.
Because I was like, wait, why am I not here?
Yeah.
That was my only question to you. Because I was looking at it, I was like, why am I not? Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Fred, for pointing that out. And I will follow up with Casaria to make sure that you are included in a revised version of those minutes, and absolutely in this meeting's minutes.
I'll just step away from the computer.
The speakers left their 2-high definition audio device.
Hi, Lee.
Hi there, Beth.
I was just saying hi.
Thanks. Hi. Waiting for a few more folks to appear in chairs in front of virtual backgrounds before we get going again here.
For virtual backgrounds. Uh-huh.
Sorry for the short break.
This is good, interesting discussion.
It is.
I'm really glad I'm getting to ask the questions of what does that mean?
As opposed to you asking us specifically on a particular project.
Oh, well. As opposed.
Mhm. All right, it looks like most people are back. I'm going to go ahead and share screen again. Welcome back. Hope everyone had a chance to gulp down some coffee or dirty chai or Momo Cocoa. Why don't we go ahead and jump right into it? So, as I mentioned before the break, what we're going to do now is get into some of the specifics that have been of interest to members of the RAC, as well as included in questions that were distributed to you for your consideration and sharing with the people who you are representing to this committee. So the first thing that we're going to be talking about here is the definition of a target industry. So this is your opportunity to share with the department your thoughts on our definition of a target industry and the specificity described using a 3-digit North American Industry Classification System code. How you feel about multiple target industries being allowed and similar target industries being clustered together for the purpose of identifying needed sites. And feel free to raise your hand if you have a response to any of these items. Please go ahead, Beth.
So as somebody mentioned, 3-digit NAICS codes are fairly specific. I'm not sure that I have a problem with that or a big concern with that if there's some flexibility.
Mm-hmm.
So for instance, if you're allowed to identify target industries related to electronics manufacturing and chip manufacturing and some other stuff in there, so multiple target industries that are related, I think that would be very helpful. I'm a little worried that this is going to lead to cities trying to list every possible target industry, and sometimes it's a little less clear why an organization is in one 3-digit NAICS code rather than another. It could be like historical inaccuracy, or an industry isn't necessarily a business isn't necessarily just one thing. So I have some concerns about how that plays out a little bit. I also wonder if there isn't some flexibility to be had in, target industries that aren't as directly related to each other, but where the businesses have similar site characteristic needs. So let's talk about something like chip fab and food manufacturing, food products manufacturing. They're obviously very different industries, but sometimes the locational characteristics are really quite similar. And in that case, you in both of them, you need an awful lot of water and wastewater capacity to the site. So so that's a little bit my long way. And then I guess the other minor question or minor point is that it would be helpful if Business Oregon is going to update their matrix, which I do hope they will, for them to have some way to tell people using it what the target industries are under each of their broad types of industries. Like clean tech, high tech is one of their types of industries. And I'm not sure which target industries those are, which NAICS codes those are.
That's useful. Thank you for bringing that up. And we are going to get to the site questions here, but I just wanted to mention for everyone's benefit, Larry Holzgang, who is representing Business Oregon to this committee, was not able to attend today due to an internal retreat, but we'll be hearing about all of this in the follow-up meeting. So thank you. Jerry, please go ahead.
Yeah, I would echo some of the best concerns on the 3-digit. I think we could probably work with that, but understand that the industry's changed rapidly. It's a 20-year forecast. I still remember Medford having a disastrous SIC-based code that at that time, Blockbuster was part of the motion picture industry as opposed to a retail use. These things change so quickly in 20 years, it's a long time. And so some level of flexibility, I think, is going to be important in there. I think another thing that's important to recognize is a lot of these target industries are actually going to be accommodated in speculative industrial space, which is multi-tenant, and it's difficult on the renewing and leasing to basically monitor that. What is it actually intended for? Who's going to use it? And I think that's something Stu actually in this letter that he submitted mentioned as well. There's been some big industries that have located in space that required a lot of flexibility. And I do think from an economic development perspective, you don't want to lose the flexibility you need sometimes to respond to way things. I mean, as long as it's a good faith, I'm not talking about an obvious bait and switch where I bring it in for industrial and 2 years later I convert it to a regional mall, right? To address maybe what Gil might be worried we're going to try to do. But a lot of times industries have just changed, and that's just not how they organize anymore. That's not the kind of space usage they use anymore. And I do think we need to not forget the large amount of employment uses that locate in speculative industrial space, and we need to find sites that are appropriate for larger developers like a Trail McCrow or a Prologis to develop a multi-tenant spec spark industrial space. And that's actually a really important economic development tool.
Thank you for the comment. And I also just want to add as context that flex and spec industrial space does not need to be identified as a result of the target industry's approach, unless we are looking at a community that has very little industrial development and they need to be very specific about the type of thing that they're coming up with. So I think that might be an unusual situation. The only reason I'm bringing this up is to make sure that we're all working within the context of the target industry's approach not being the only way to establish land need. It's just a sort of specialized one. Nellie, please go ahead.
Thanks, Lee. Nellie McAdams with Farmland First. Online, when I look at the 2-digit codes, I'm seeing that there are only 20 of them, and about half of them probably don't apply to an EOA, like agriculture, mining, utilities, retail. And so, if it's just like a dozen 2-digit sectors, then you might as well have a check off the box kind of thing. I think there are about 96 of the 3-digit ones, and 3-digit seems to be pretty common in the EOAs that we looked at, even the ones that were using the target industries approach. So, I wouldn't imagine that there should be an issue with using 3. Even Hillsborough's used 3 as kind of the minimal. And so, sorry, baby crying here. But I guess my only question still goes back to whether including more than one industries for the clear eventuality that some might not pan out, not be in the additive, but be in the alternative for what could be selected.
Thanks for the comment. Gil, I believe you're up next.
Yeah, I just I'm wondering here about, and thank you for the point that the target industry approach is not the only approach to be made. So for Jerry's example about flex space, that doesn't necessarily need to go by, that land doesn't have to be there through the target industry approach. Because there are other ways through their economic opportunity analysis to define multiple potential uses. And so I think in many ways the site characteristics are the more important piece of the conversation. And then to Beth's point, there are certain food production facilities and chip manufacturing that might have a similar site characteristic as well as water usage. Those are not, though, in your example, Beth, related industries. So again, I think maybe the target industry approach is not not workable for that kind of flexibility. On the other hand, you've reinforced how important it is to think about site characteristics. And like you, I'm hoping the matrix gets updated very soon, and it will have to be updated regularly, as Jerry points out. Anyway, I'll leave it there. Thanks.
Thanks for the comment. Beth, I believe you're next.
Beth Goodman with Echo Northwest, a minor comment on using the most recent NAICS definitions that are out every 5 years. We're going to have situations where a city has started their EOA and the new NAICS definitions come out sort of mid EOA. They don't change that much usually, but I'm just flagging that as something that'll happen, and maybe there should be some consideration of it.
Thank you. That's a great point. Dave?
Thank you, Lee. Dave Honeycutt, Oregon Property Owners. The whole discussion about flex zoning is interesting, and it might be helpful for the department to consider as part of the rule, making it clear that a hybrid approach can be used as part of an EOA, where you're using both the target industry approach and potentially a safe harbor approach. Or some type of alternative so that a city, especially a smaller one or one that hasn't done an EOA, doesn't feel like they're stuck or limited.
Yeah, thanks. I believe you're right. That's not explicitly called out in the rule, but it's possible to do both of these things. So
yeah,
I appreciate it. Ted?
Thank you. Ted Reed, Metro Regional Planning. So I've mentioned this before. All of the examples that we're talking about are industrial uses. The Business Oregon matrix is all about industrial uses. So I'm just wondering if, for the purpose of this targeted industries approach, we need to narrow it to industrial type uses that have arguably more specificity about the types of sites they need than other sectors do. So maybe it's a matter of narrowing, if you're going to use this targeted industries approach to establish a land deficit, it needs to be about industrial uses rather than, say, office, which you can accommodate in many other locations.
Okay, thank you for the comment. Allie?
Hey there, Allie Camp, City of Springfield. I want to echo what Beth Goodman said about the 5-year time frame. Beth, you worked on our EOA, and I think it took longer than 5 years, or the span of time that it was kind of gathered and then utilized. So good call out. Thank you. I also just have maybe a question. Are we only talking about defining targeted industry with NAICS codes, or are there other considerations for how to define it?
Yeah, thanks. Right now, as the definition is written, it essentially says that any industry, aside from retail, could be designated as a target industry. It's really about how specific that target industry needs to be. And NAICS codes are the most expedient and I think probably thorough method of being able to provide that level of specificity. As I read the definition as it's drafted right now, it does not provide a possibility for defining an industry in a different way. However, the department's hope is that allowing for multiple target industries and clustering together industries, noting the term related, which someone called out earlier, that perhaps it's a little bit broader. It's just that we are going to need this type of information to ensure site protections used in this approach.
I think I'll just comment that the NAICS code and the world that we're working in with land use, they don't necessarily, we're not speaking the same language across those two categories. We're talking about land preservation and potential expansion consideration of how to use sites And that language is zoning and land use language, and we're trying to apply something different to it. And I just worry that things will get lost in the mix or lost in translation between those two pieces.
Thanks. And I do actually have a question for the cities in particular on this committee and a future key question. So appreciate your comment. And Jerry?
I know in this we've been focusing on industrial, and most of the stuff we've been working on of late has been industrial, but we have worked in communities that retail is actually a significant portion of what they're trying to target. If they're either tourism related, you know, we get more of this in states that have a sales tax where they really want to have a regional mall. It's a nice thing to have fiscally, but we do get some of the jurisdictions that are big fiscal impact, like if you look at Woodburn and the factory outlet, it's a significant fiscal impact to the city. And so I know we're not looking at target industries from fiscal, maybe we're excluding, and I just want to be clear, if we're excluding retail from target industry approach or and just sticking to industrial. I don't think office makes a lot of difference. As Ted noted, office has a lot more flexibility on configurations, and you can deal with a lot of ways, besides the fact right now no one's spending a lot of time thinking about office requirements. But the retail is one that we do see come up quite often in different jurisdictions.
Gordon, I see your hand up.
Thank you, Jerry. With the risk of throwing a bomb into the discussion by bringing up climate-friendly areas at this point, I think that it's not a goal of the state, if you will, to put large new retail facilities in areas where we're doing UGB expansions. Let's just put it that way. And I don't want to get into that, get into the merits or demerits of that, but it is a strong, we have climate friendly area rules now that are looking to get away from that paradigm. But so anyway, I just wanted to throw that out there.
Thanks, Gordon. Fred, you're up next.
Oh, excuse me. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. I was thinking about the gentleman who spoke about office development, or industries that deal more with office work, data centers, that kind of thing. I wonder though if implementing, say if it is zoned for office work and things like that, but like at the bottom floors, you have your retail or, your different aspects no, I'm not done talking. To enhance the Am I muted?
Fred, it seems that your audio is going in and out a little bit. We can still hear you sometimes, but I did note that it cut out for a moment there.
Okay, because can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. What I was saying was that like even though there is industrial development with different companies and firms, you can still have retail attached to those properties that would, bring in community revenue that could contribute to the development of the communities, that land has been designated for. And I just wonder if that's a possibility that can be looked at when I'm talking about collaborating the different issues, and even also keeping, again, my favorites, accessibility and, green spaces to make it friendly for community development.
Yeah, thank you for the comment. our rule as drafted does not speak to mixed uses. It really has been primarily focused on employment uses, so I appreciate that. Gil?
Okay.
Yeah, thanks. I just was responding to the point that Jerry, excuse me, yeah, that Jerry brought up, and then Gordon's response, which seemed a little bit either or paradigms. I'm just wondering about the possibility of including in definitions ancillary uses, so that and those can be defined by, in other words, for ancillary retail or office included in the industrial use, and those could be limited by a small percentage of floor area or site area, because well, we don't want industrial zoning to turn into large scale shopping malls at the edge of the regions or the edge of the cities. For climate purposes, I think, Gordon, you still want people to walk to get a cup of coffee or get a sandwich at lunch or that kind of thing. So, or even there might be a childcare on site in some of these cases. So I think having an ancillary use definition that's limited would be, I think the same could apply to office as well as to retail.
Thanks, Gil. We'll do Brian and Bill, and then we are going to need to move on to our next key question. So folks, if you haven't had a chance to bring your voice in on this particular one, please feel free to write up your responses and submit them to myself and Casaria. Brian, please go ahead.
Thanks, Brian Pohl, Forest Grove. I've been sitting here listening to all this and I appreciate the sort of esoteric and sort of bureaucratic conversation we're having here. I want to bring it back to the focus that I have when I walk into this meeting, and that's, when we talk about excluding or being more sort of defined in these things, I can't help but think of that word exclusion, and what we can be excluding here is people's jobs and people's livelihoods, a city's ability to stay solvent. These things are really important to me and near and dear to my heart. As a small city in the metro area, I want maximum flexibility. I want the 2-digit code. If we have to go with the code, I want 2 digits. This is a big deal. It's not so much about some of the really bureaucratic things we're talking about for me as it is about people being able to afford homes, to stay in their homes, to replace their roof. I'm having a hard time just sort of sitting by and when we talk about all this sort of ticky-tacky stuff and not just kind of bringing my focus back to that.
Thanks for the context. Bill?
Thank you. Bill Reed, Finance Director, City of North Plains. Thank you, Brian. Great reminder, North Plains' approach to the EOA was very much that issue. 85% tax base being residential and growing, and no economy to kind of help balance it out and help us pay for streets and services. That's part of motivation for trying to grow an economy. So thank you. But I just want to kind of speak up a little bit for considering some rules allowance for smaller communities on the retail side of things. I think Jerry's right. Back when I worked with him, I did work on EOAs myself, where coastal communities and others really retail commercial services were a key part of the economy. And a lot of those are smaller communities. But in the case of North Plains being 3,400 people, as a key example, North Plains has a 5-acre site that it is working hard to get a grocery store on. The city doesn't have its own full-service grocery store yet. And it has brownfield issues. We're working with Business Oregon slowly but surely on getting it there. But our residents, our rapidly growing community, everybody's driving all the way to Hillsborough and Cornelius and even Forest Grove to shop. And if we didn't have a 5-acre site to try to work through the brownfields issues, we'd want to try to target commercial specifically as a targeted industry. And we feel that would actually help in terms of environmental issues and vehicle miles traveled, because it would bring shopping trips closer to home. And we can't be the only small community where residents are having to drive a long ways to shop every day. So I think perhaps for smaller communities under a population level, under certain criteria, maybe commercial services of some types can be a targeted industry, because even what they ask for or look to do isn't going to be big anyway. They're a small community. So just thoughts.
Thank you, Bill. Jerry, I see your hand is up, but I do need to move us along to our next question. So apologies, but please submit any additional comments you'd like to share to us in writing. Okay, so we have also asked the committee whether the target industries approach should be a process that is integrated into Division 9 and become sort of a standard part of an economic opportunities analysis, or if it should be its own sort of special carve out. And what the department has done is drafted this up in a way that integrates the target industries approach into the process for an EOA. Because that is very much how it is used already. This is a very common method of determining land need. So the section of this where we have determined that some sort of carve out would be more appropriate is as in the form of site designation and protections. And so that is its own special carve out process that will need to result from target industries approach EOA. So that's the approach that we're taking right now. We did receive feedback from Farmland First indicating that this should be preserved for special circumstances. So Nellie, if you'd like to voice that, or if others have opinions to share on this topic or the direction that the department is taking, we'd like to hear that now. Please go ahead, Beth.
My opinion is that I'd love to see it if it was an optional thing. So, integrated, but you don't have to do it with every EOA. So I guess that means I'm talking about a special carve out. But I could be wrong about that.
In my thinking, I wouldn't call it a special carve out, but
okay,
yeah.
all right.
Yeah.
All right. Then, something that a city can do, may do, but isn't required to do.
Thanks. Dave?
Yeah, Dave Honeycutt, Oregon Property Owners. I agree with what Beth just said. I think that's sort of the point that I was trying to get at on my last comment. You need to be specific in your rules and make sure that it's understood by a city that this is a option for them as opposed to something that's required to be considered as they prepare their EOA.
Thank you, Dave. Gil?
Yeah, I would say it's an option. But I do think that this approach, at least at a certain size of land need identification, needs to have a better regional context, not just regional activity that could be latched onto, but a regional location analysis that looks at alternatives. Because I think for very large expansions, for all the reasons that Bill and Jerry described, yeah, sure, you can make a rationale, but is that really the best place for a large expansion of a target industry? And I think that needs a scope of view that is larger than the individual jurisdiction. And so how you build that in the process, I'm not exactly sure, but I guess that's the part for me. And there's a great example in Southern Oregon in that regional problem solving context where the cities of all the cities and the counties in the area came to agreement through a process of identifying a single industrial land piece that could suffice for a number of industry types that was split between two jurisdictions, Medford and I believe Phoenix, which made much more sense than individual jurisdictions trying to do their own little piece with their own little UGB expansion. And so there's got to be some way to have that, at least that part of the analysis, not just, oh yeah, there's regional activity along these lines, but some options analysis. And again, at a certain scale of site that says, is this actually the right place to put that, given regional activity?
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
I appreciate your perspective there. Nellie.
Thanks, Lee. Nellie McAdams with Farmland First. You'll hear my son in the background. Sorry for that background noise, but I'm still trying to understand the complete difference between the use of target industries and safe harbor. But it does seem like more land is often brought in for kind of larger aspirational industries, and I just would want for any process to also emphasize the city's ability to service that with infrastructure or with a reasonable plan for infrastructure. And so that's why in my comments I emphasized that the comp plan or any planning document should probably be amended before the EOA is created, just to ensure that transportation, water, et cetera, are feeding into those industries that are being attracted, and that the city can actually reasonably expect to service it. I think also if the city is looking to attract particular industries, that there should be particular attention to goal 1 participation, to make sure that the community is desirous of that industry. And I just want to bring in too, I don't remember if goals 3, 4, and 5 need to be considered in the EOA, but at least, of course, for the UGB. And from my perspective, agriculture, forestry, these are industries that are never going to be included in an EOA directly, but are always going to be affected by an EOA in terms of the land that is brought in. That's almost always the opportunity cost, is that land is taken out of the mix. And so I would think that, a target industries approach, if it does result in more land, if it is maybe more aspirational, should have a greater consideration for its impacts on those industries, and, therefore probably a greater focus on efficiency of the land that is being brought in. So that was kind of my perspective on if this is being used, having more stringent standards.
Thanks, Nellie. So hearing from you and Gil, support for more analysis demonstrating ability to serve a site and a more comprehensive regional look being features of this. Ted, please go ahead.
Thank you. Ted Reed, Metro Regional Planning. Picking up on some of Nellie and Gil's comments, I'm trying to figure out how a city could establish some reasonable relationship between the targeted industries approach and a forecast, right? There seems like we need some bounds somehow to the targeted industries approach, so the sky's not the limit. So I don't have an answer to that, but it does feel like some of this needs to find some grounding in bigger trends, regional forecasting, so that we don't end up with aspirations that are just sort of detached from what's likely or feasible. And then are you ready to move on to the protection question yet, or would you like me to wait for that?
Will you parking lot that thought?
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Dave, you'll be the last comment for this particular question, and we'll move on.
Thank you, Lee. Dave Honeycutt, Oregon Property Owners. I have some real concerns about the extent of the use of a regional approach for a variety of reasons. And number one, we shouldn't be hamstringing a city's ambition. If North Plains wants to expand and target a particular industry, and so does Hillsborough, and so does Forest Grove, why should we interfere with that? That's a city's determination to make, and they ought to be making that. We also need multiple targets. A region, we're in a competitive, in some cases, especially with the target industries that we're talking about, we're in an international competition. If we only have one particular area in the region, we pick one city as the winner, and the industry doesn't like that particular site that we've chosen, then we're out. And that's not a good idea either. And then, of course, the last problem is who gets to decide who gets to pick the winners and losers between the city for a targeted industry, for say a chip plant, Is Metro going to pick North Plains's, make North Plains's decision for them when North Plains isn't in Metro? Is DLCD going to make that determination for a region? I think the regional approach is fraught with difficulty and really counterproductive.
Thank you. And Bill and Nellie, I'm sorry to do this, but I do need to move us on to the next question. Hopefully we'll have a little bit of time at the end. Okay. This is an important question. As I mentioned, we are working across agencies to confirm business organs' support for the approach as it's drafted in the proposed rule. Are there other sources that you would look to aside from the industrial site requirements matrix, or perhaps correspondence with a regional development officer that you could include in an EOA? This is a question specifically for our cities and for consultants on the committee who are practitioners in this area. It is a possibility that a business organ does not want to be involved in this way, and so we'd like to hear from you what you would like to rely on, if not this. Nellie, please go ahead.
Yeah, I'll just start with my concerns in looking at that as the only resource that would be consulted. It's looking at land in terms of acres rather than square feet, and I think maybe it might limit cities from thinking creatively about asking industries to build vertically. Health industries, many industries can build vertically rather than horizontally. And I think that if we're looking at acreage, that might kind of lead the conversation towards larger land requests. And I would really want for any data that we use for how much land would be needed to accommodate industries to be highly prospective and not retrospective in terms of how much land will be required in the future. So looking at the CHIPS Act applications, those were used for investment on existing footprints rather than for expansion. And I am just trying to keep those realities of future industrial land requests and preferences in mind.
Thanks. Great comment. Jerry?
Jerry Johnson, Johnson Economics. I guess I'd like to reiterate some of the things I talked about before about having multiple sources being allowed into this, because I think it's difficult for business organs to stay abreast of this. There's emerging trends. We're going to get into some industries that are relatively specific that they're not going to have knowledge of occasionally. And so I would like to recognize business organ as an accepted source, but I think there's a lot of other sources that are out there that can be helpful as well. We're constantly getting site selection information and literature, and some of the stuff is just what they're currently doing. Increasingly, we've also had good fortune with some regional economic development agencies that have actually tracked prospects and what they're requiring on their sites. And to the extent that they do that, I appreciate when they do that, because it gives us some good basis to say, look, we're getting 10 requests a year for these sorts of sites looking for these specific characteristics. And it gives us a basis of findings to say, these are the types of sites that people are looking for. And it's not necessarily business organ, but there's lots of different sources I think I'd like to be able to utilize.
Thank you. In response to your comment, just makes me think of the economic development districts that are participating on this committee. If you'd like to speak up on this topic, please do. Otherwise, look forward to some outreach from me on this particular issue. Nellie, you still have your hand up. Is that current or older?
Sorry, I'll lower it.
Okay, thanks. Beth, please go ahead.
Beth Goodman with Echo Northwest. I want to second what Jerry said, and then also put out there a little bit of the context for economic development. Businesses are, often footloose and fancy free, and they can locate just about anywhere that they want to locate. Maybe it's considering I want to be somewhere in the Willamette Valley, but that's a pretty big area. It could be, I want to be somewhere in the Northwest or somewhere that gives me, the site that I need, and I don't know, other selection criteria. So remember that we're operating in a very competitive environment, and Oregon, by its nature, by our land use system, which I do love, makes it harder to do some of this. So so I'm going to go back to flexibility and what Jerry said about having multiple sources for this. There's frequently little data out there. Having done research over different periods of time, it's hard to find information out there about site needs to justify why you need different characteristics. In part because everyone knows that you need X and such characteristic, except you can't find a place to cite that. So, sometimes interviews of, economic development professionals, like at Business Oregon, at the regional economic development agencies, the COGS, that kind of stuff, that can be very important. Also case studies, what's happened in other communities. So for instance, what's going on with data centers in Prineville, because there's some interesting story to be told there. So I urge us not to limit it, but I think of the Business Oregon matrix as sort of the minimum thing that you can depend on for certain types of information.
Thank you. Gil.
Yes, I 2 points. One is I wanted to echo Nellie's comments on it would be best to start with site need being identified by square footage or floor area as opposed to acreage only, because as one example, some of the people on this call might remember from my days as Portland planning director. It's a very urban example, but when we started the South Waterfront planning process, and I was very keen on getting a foothold for the bioscience industry in the Portland region, and particularly in Portland. Everybody told me, oh, you can only go 2 stories. Well, you can see what happened there. And there's actually expansion room in the OMSI district and to some extent Central East Side across the way for related product manufacture and that kind of thing. So I think the future is really going to be for many of these, not all, many of these industries in stacking and not just ever expanding horizontally. So I think starting with the notion of floor area as opposed to acreage would be a helpful point. The second thing is I think that the conversation that Gordon and Beth picked up on as well, we should talk about other sources. And Jerry, if you have some, or Beth, it would be nice to get those out there. I would assume, Lee, that the LCD could have an evolving list of sources on your website to help with these. They'd have to have some screen for credibility, but I think the more that information that's more up to date and industry specific would be helpful. I think that's what's behind your question here. And I don't have a lot to offer in that regard. But I think developing some information, even if that becomes a budget request for the LCD to do some research or to, huddle others who have been doing research, I think is a really important point here, because a lot of this conversation has revolved around site requirements. Thanks.
Thanks, Gil. I do just want to add as context for the reason that we're considering this question is, our hope through this rulemaking is to provide more clarity for how a city does this. And if we're not defining what the sources are that a city could rely on to make the case for site requirements, then that is an area that a city could be challenged on its assertion in its EOA. And so that's why, initially we are looking at this as something that we would like to kind of narrow down or make official. But there are obviously challenges in attempting to do that, as everyone is communicating here. Bill, please go ahead.
Sure, thank you. On the topic of sources, I guess what I would say, at least for a smaller community like North Plains, I'm going to be an advocate for more involvement with Business Oregon than less. I'm going to agree with everyone who has stated, has kind of put forward the caveat that the Business Oregon hasn't updated their targeted industries and industrial site matrix in a while. It's a shame it hasn't been done, and it needs to be done. But having said that, um, cities, particularly smaller cities that like North Plains has our own UGB, we have to plan infrastructure with growth, of course, kind of solo. It's really Business Oregon that we deal with on that. And so the earlier Business Oregon is involved in helping us vet some of the information for planning industrial sites and land need and potential UGB expansion, the better. The RISIS program was just re-enabled by legislation this past spring session. Small cities should be able to kind of be staged in a process that lets Business Oregon participate earlier the better. And so their participation is great. Having said that, Business Oregon deals with maybe 20% of the industrial site queries that happen on a yearly basis, probably less. It's the industrial commercial brokers, the commercial real estate brokers that really handle the majority of them. So somehow they should be recognized as a legitimate source of information for planning site need. And in the case of North Plains, we did a GIS analysis of that specific area of Hillsborough north of Highway 26 to understand how businesses were actually using the land. So that was part of it. We looked at industrial brokers. We brought in their perspective. Our timing is great. The semiconductor report and task force report came out, so we were able to lean on that. And then Business Oregon, of course. But having said all that, as far as on the square footage versus land issue, since we're talking mostly industrial, businesses are looking for sites by site size because they secure a site, they put down a 20 to 25% footprint maybe, and then that larger site that they've acquired and lets them kind of scale up at their own pace, whether rapidly or over time. So I would hesitate to get into the specifics of relying more on square footage on the industrial side of things. If office was more of a component of all of this, then maybe, but on the industrial side of things, that's really a site and acreage issue. And I would just kind of motivate leaning that direction. So thank you.
Appreciate the comment. We'll do Jerry and then Anthony, and then we're going to move on to our next key question.
Thanks. I'd like to second Bill's point that the brokers are an excellent source. Everyone worries about brokers with conflict, but they actually do know what they're talking about, and they do handle most of the things. You do have to monitor it for conflict, but at the same time, they're a good source. But I would be very supportive if Business Oregon is open to it, to have them vetting. If they, had a role as a vetting sources to say, look, these are legitimate sources, I think they'd be better positioned than BLCD just to, a bit like Gil said, if you send a letter saying, yeah, we run through this actually makes sense. Wouldn't be bad to have that sort of screen, make sure that things make sense. Secondarily, I do want to talk about the form piece. As Gil mentioned, things in South Waterfront, but I do want to point out that form comes at a cost, and multi-story industrial can be done, but it's difficult to do. We may be starting to see it. We're already getting price effect issues on land values. People follow the land markets in the Portland metropolitan area. Industrial sites that were $9 a square foot are now $25 a square foot. We're getting a price input to the production model that says land is very expensive right now because of scarcity of quality sites. But at the same time, we need to have a competitive inventory, as Beth pointed out. And if it costs them more to develop in a certain format and they don't have to do that in a different site, it does hurt your competitive position.
Good perspective to share. Anthony?
Yeah, thank you. Anthony Reeder, City of Hillsborough. As we get ready to move on to the next slide and the next question, I just want to take a minor step back and maybe plant a small flag for our small and mid-sized jurisdictions that really, I think, would benefit from a dependable, reliable, pre-defensible, not a word, source of information. So whether that is a Business Oregon publication, either as it exists today or in an updated, vetted kind of format, I think offering those jurisdictions some comfort and consistency and predictability in the process would be really advantageous for them.
Thanks. Something of a safe harbor and allowable other sources.
Yeah, I wanted to steer clear of using a defined term like that, but that is where I was going. Yes.
Appreciate it. All right. To keep us moving to probably our most controversial, or at least most worthy of your consideration question, is really just around how is it that a city should designate and protect or preserve the sites that it is identifying through the target industries approach. So the draft rule, as we distributed it for this committee meeting, essentially says that target industry sites should be designated and preserved by a zoning ordinance or local measure. And I do want to ask for your opinion on that in a moment. That a site does have the flexibility to be developed for an unanticipated employment use of equal or higher economic benefit. I know there's a lot of questions around that and how we might define it. And then there is sort of a protection feature included in this that basically says that provides zoning restrictions that say industrial sites cannot be rezoned to commercial or residential, and other employment target industry sites cannot be rezoned to residential, and that a new EOA would be required to demonstrate that these sites are no longer needed for employment use. So I'll just go ahead and open it up and see what is speaking to people. I'm probably expecting a lot of hands here. Ted, go ahead.
Thank you, Ted Reed, Metro Regional Planning. I'm going to suggest that maybe we think about protections a little bit differently for lands that are already in a city's boundary versus lands that are added to the urban growth boundary based on this targeted industry approach. So I guess to draw that out a little bit, if a city adds land to its urban growth boundary using this targeted industry approach, I would want more protection for that land for that use. To me, it feels like the city should have some more discretion around how they use lands that are already in their jurisdiction.
Thank you. Gil.
Yeah, just to argue with Ted's point just a little bit there. I usually agree with Ted, but I think that one of the restrictions missing from this slide, which was in the text, is precluding land divisions within this that turn this into a bunch of small parcels. And I think even within existing UGBs and cities, Ted, that's a risk to being able to reserve it for industry. You end up with really chopped up pieces that may not be that workable. So think about that one. The other zoning restriction that or not zoning, but another restriction that I mentioned was keeping a presence in the long-term capital plan for these target industry sites. So that doesn't become the reason they can't actually be used. That doesn't mean they're budgeted in next year's budget, but it means in your long-term capital planning that's still present there. I do think on the second bullet, equal or higher economic benefit is, it may be difficult to arrive at the right words behind this concept or a shared understanding within the rule. But I'm hoping that at least the LCD could have some guidelines that are informational that can help in decisions around this. It'd be great to have them in the rules. I just don't know that we're going to all get to an agreement on what those are, because there's always the circumstance that you left out. But you could say a rational person, we'd all agree on these words, but actually what they mean in practice is going to be, I think, very difficult to make clear for parties on either side of the decision.
Yeah, thank you, Gil. I think you did really sort of put a point on the tension that we're trying to navigate, which is to say that cities pursue economic development opportunities for many reasons, and it should be up to a city to conclude whether an unanticipated potential use on that target industry site might satisfy the same original economic benefit that it was thinking about, you know, whether that might be new job creation or quality job creation or local property tax revenue. This is intentionally open language, but definitely will require some thought in how it would play out. Fred, please.
One of the things that I've just been sort of listening to that I kind of want to agree with the cities, the smaller cities, especially the North Plains and Hillsborough. I just think that like how you guys want to expand and the different uses for industrial things. Now, unfortunately, I will be honest, I'm not exactly sure what the business taxonomy or the BLCD really is, so forgive my ignorance. But I do think, and one of the things that I'm thinking of is if your cities want to expand, right, for industry, and yes, the gentleman earlier, the Mr. Honeycutt was talking about, city expansion and a competitive international market. This is true. But one of the things that I wonder about is how do you want your communities to actually look? Not just economically, but I'm talking aesthetically, socially, what are some of the, because I sort of see this, you guys, as a pebble dropping into a pond and the ripples going out, affecting everything and everybody. Okay. And do forgive me if my thing is either narrow focused on, affordable housing for everybody and accessibility with disabilities. But in all honesty, if I'm looking at this and I'm navigating in your communities, as a concerned citizen, as just a person who's living or somebody who might want to work there, that has to be considered. How does that accessibility work in a situation where you're looking at, it doesn't matter what the industry is. How does that industry ripple through these communities, y'all's communities, and how does that not just allow you to be internationally recognized, but how does your community life, either socially or civically or economically, is going to flourish? And I think that while we're looking at industrial and, strictly economic things, but I think those other clusters are important. And is there a way for us to Venn diagram this stuff to where we're all looking at the central, everybody knows what a Venn diagram is, right? And so is it possible for us to look at a way for these industries, those aspects of town and land and community development, to collaborate? Because I think if we nitpick at it, it's going to confuse us, even if we know what we're talking about. But it won't address the things that might be really important, such as community infrastructure. In order for any money to be made for towns, there has to be things there in it for the people to move into. And do forgive me if I'm taking a long time and sort of rambling through socially, but I really want to sort of press the point home that without the people, even if the industry is what it is, you still need the people to work there, to live there, to make it grow.
Thank you, Fred.
Mhm.
We've got quite a few hands up, so I'm going to move on to Beth.
I'll try to keep this brief. Should we look at the Central Oregon regional large lot study as a not study, but parts of Division 24 as a model for preserving the sites, because there's some pieces in there about preserving and not having the sites subdivided and requiring, I think it's requiring a master plan. It's a little bit since I read over it. But that's something that we have for that particular instance of a large lot program.
Yeah, thanks. Great suggestion. Dave?
Thank you, Lee. Dave Honeycutt, Oregon Property Owners. Just on the language itself, there's some cleanup language. It's vague. If the department doesn't do it via rulemaking, then we'll get the Court of Appeals making our planning decisions for us on a case by case, city by city, EOA by EOA determination. And I don't think that really benefits anybody on any side of this issue. So it may be that there's nothing more that we can do, that you have to leave the language the way it is. But we at least ought to talk about that, and I can send in some written comments on just some of the vagaries in the language. The one section that or subsection that concerns me the most is the very last one that talks about um, applying preventative or limitations on development on adjacent properties in order to protect a target site. That has some pretty significant potential impacts on the property owner, and more importantly, and Gordon raised the specter of CFAC. I think we all need to consider the housing production targets and the ONA provisions that cities will soon be trying to comply with. And I think you could potentially create some real conflicts between ONA and Goal 9 as the city tries to work through the target industry approach that you've identified in the rule.
Thank you. We'll look for your written comments, Dave. Appreciate it. Jerry?
Hi, Jerry Johnson, Johnson Economics. Comment on a few of the bullets. The first one, I'm great with protecting sites. I think that's good, but I do think we need to recognize there's some variance between ones that are currently in the urban growth boundary and ones coming in. It's one thing to bring a site in with under a certain criteria and then put restrictions on it, but I do think it's a little different if they're already in the urban growth boundary and you're basically saying we're taking this site and we're designated it. I think we should also recognize that a lot of the sites, the property owners are difficult to predict, and property owner disposition is a real variable in economic development. Is the site actually available if somebody wanted to buy it, at what time frame and at what price? And is it a reasonable market responsive price, or is it, I don't want to sell it, but if you pay me a ridiculous amount of money, I'll sell it. You just don't have the control of these all the time. So it's difficult in how you put some of these pieces. On the second bullet point, I would like to take, instead of economic benefit, to community benefit. I think Andrea talked about that earlier, and Bill mentioned a little bit. And there's some fiscal implications as well. There's a lot of things for the community. You may want to clarify that, which would be helpful for us if it's clear. But I do think it's sort of broader than if we just run, either employment or payroll or some basic metric that we say this is better or worse. It may be more holistic than that. And Gil mentioned on the industrial for the no commercial residential development, I think you may want to make sure the industrial zonings or the industrial zones can allow for some, industrial associated limited commercial, obviously have a very small scale or scale limited or use limited, but not precluded altogether.
Thank you. Anthony?
Hey there, Anthony Reeder, City of Hillsborough. Just a couple quick points on each of these. As I look at the first bullet point, and maybe I'm misunderstanding a little bit what's intended. What I'm hoping could be incorporated to the rule as relates site preservation or site designation is maybe that it wouldn't tie to a specific geography, a specific, piece of land but a percentage or a portion of the total land brought in to an urban growth boundary, just knowing that, if there's a maybe not call for a targeted industry immediately, you could end up with a vacant, undeveloped site surrounded by other sites until that targeted industry hopefully shows up. I want to echo and reinforce what I've heard from a couple of our other collaborators on the call about the economic benefit of economic development to communities. I think there's an extent to which the not so elephant in the room is the impact of measures 5 and 50 on the resources of jurisdictions. And there are a lot of cities that are really resource constrained in terms of being able to generate enough revenue from their property tax base to support and serve their community. Last but not least, something was touched on a little bit earlier in terms of the zoning restrictions. As we look at that first bullet point, industrial, no commercial or residential, I can understand and agree entirely that there probably shouldn't be residential allowed. We did have a brief discussion of maybe the value of some ancillary commercial in order to support the workers and the folks that might be coming to these industrial or employment lands. And so I'd ask for maybe a little bit of flexibility or some language in there surrounding that. Great, and that's what I got. Thank you.
Thank you. Matt.
Great, thanks, Lee. This is Matt Gray, Economic Development from Washington County. So just to kind of plus one and reiterate a few things that folks have been saying here on the economic benefit question. And Jerry, you interpreted it differently, the conversation around community benefit. When I heard community benefit, my mind immediately went to non-taxable uses. Parks and other kind of public properties that might potentially dilute limited industrial lands. So I want to come back to that fiscal balance as an appropriate justification. Washington County, we're in our third year of a budget deficit. Folks think about Washington County as a wealthy county. Yes, we have a booming economy, but local governments are really struggling at different sizes. So just want to bring that up. Thanks.
I appreciate you saying that, Matt. I also was thinking of tax revenues as an economic and fiscal benefit rather than a community benefit. And I, as was drafting this language, was sort of concerned that community benefit could be interpreted as housing. But I do think that if we have, zoning restrictions that prevent target industry sites from being developed for housing, perhaps we don't need a redundant protection in this particular provision. Nellie, you're next.
Thank you, Lee. Nellie McAdams, Farmland First. I do like Hillsborough's idea of having a percentage, maybe rather than specific sites. And I wondered if this was also the time to talk about potential for clawback provisions if the land isn't used for the target industry.
Yeah,
is
it
ahead. Now? Yeah, I think, to Dave Honeycutt's point earlier too, like individual cities should be advocating for industrial growth within their city. And, if they're in a region, I think as long as that's not requiring significant amounts of additional land set aside for that industry, that makes a ton of sense. Because, especially if that growth would be happening within the UGB, they could pivot quite easily. But when we're looking, for example, at a land intensive industry that multiple cities in one very small region are all vying for, that will only eventually land in one of them, I think that becomes problematic for multiple EOAs to use a target industry approach to attract that kind of white whale of an industry, when only one, if any, of those cities will actually attract that industry. And so that would leave other cities with, at that point, EOAs requesting large amounts of land. And I know that, EOA is just one step towards a UGB expansion proposal, and you still have to demonstrate need at that point. But I think that's one of my concerns, is that, if there's an industry trend, everybody's trying to jump on board, and there's only so much demand to go around. What happens if everybody's using target industries approach in that region? I think that's where, the Medford Phoenix example of a regional solutions approach and understanding what an EOA could look like regionally makes sense. But if cities aren't able to do that approach, should they still remain with large acreages in their EOA that may or may not be used? And so I would advocate for a clawback if, in some cases, if the EOA and the target industry that they've selected is highly land intensive and that does not arrive or is not likely to arrive within a specific amount of time. I would also say that that's not my preference, because by the time land has been an EOA is used to expand an urban growth boundary, it's highly unlikely that agricultural land is going to be selling for agricultural values in return to agricultural use. So I think prevention would be my preference, but if there is an overshot and that land is in the UGB, I would prefer a clawback.
Thank you, Nellie. Bill.
Yeah, one thing I want to try to kind of keep in mind is the fact that there are already some rails, at least when you're talking about urban growth boundary expansion and comprehensive planning and infrastructure planning, an expansion area specifically. There are already some rails on keeping a targeted industry site, is what we're calling it, trying to maintain that use or similar uses. And that's the fact that the city is on the hook for the infrastructure for serving that site, at least the mainline infrastructure. The capital improvement plan that has to be done by the city, the infrastructure plan that has to be done, and the capital improvement plan that results in SDCs, but the potential for an LID, maybe urban renewal agency or district has to be extended to help pay for things. I mean, whatever the tool is, and the loan that the city gets from the state or from the federal government, the city has to pay for the infrastructure, and it's the targeted growth that you plan for that lets you feasibly sign on to the debt you're going to take on. And so there's no incentive whatsoever for a city to plan for a major water user and then a shopping mall comes along and then chops that up, and you have major financial problems for the city. There's no incentive for a city to do that. And so I guess I would say, because of that, I think zoning as a restriction is probably perfectly appropriate, because there are rails on this. There are going to be rails on what does or doesn't happen. And I would just keep that in mind. This is very different from a site that's already in an existing UGB that has infrastructure readily available, and the use has changed. That's very different from taking on the infrastructure cost and its finance, and a site needing to be what it's planned for. That's a very different thing.
Thanks, Gil, and then we'll move on to our next question.
Yeah, and this may venture into the next question, but I do think this whole thing around target industry as part of the EOA and potential boundary expansions should be kind of defined as the exception. I mean, it should be an option, I agree, but many of the things, the concerns about restrictions and definitions and so forth, go away if a more standard EOA approach is taken. So this is, using this methodology it should be used infrequently, and it should come with restrictions. I guess I'm kind of dialing in on the second bullet on the site may be developed for employment use of equal or higher economic benefit. I think that does provide the flexibility for some of the comments from Jerry and others around rapidly changing industrial definitions and new industries, wholly new industries. I do think, though, if it's helpful, we could add such as number and quality of jobs, because I'm a little leery about defining one of those economic benefits as essentially tax revenue, because I think then that puts a lot of pressure on the definition of employment use. Even this big retail mall is going to have some jobs and that kind of thing. And so I'm a little reluctant to use that. That may be an overall reason in an EOA, but I think to not undermine this restriction or preservation piece, I'd be leery about that. But I think including some examples to give some guidance or some sideboards to what those alternative uses of equal or higher economic benefit would be helpful.
Thanks for the comment. I think we can do that. We can include some examples without limiting the types of benefits that are listed there. I might, I'm going to skip our appropriate applications key question. So we've got about 9 minutes left. I will be able to very quickly provide instructions for our next meeting, so we can go ahead and use 8 minutes to discuss this key question, which is how employment growth and the land need relationship shape up in an EOA using the target industries analysis. And Beth, you had called this out earlier as we were going through the draft rule. This is just a direct quote of a sentence added to section 15 of Division 9. It says the EOA must demonstrate how expected employment growth is expected to be accommodated on the identified sites. So I am curious how this rests with people. If you have ideas for how you might demonstrate this for your own city or for practitioners on the committee, if you have experience doing this. Beth, please go ahead.
So I think what you're saying is we've got a forecast of employment. And of that forecast of employment, we're expecting some of that forecast of employment to be on this site.
Correct.
All right. So the tough thing about this is that you often come out with things that look like really low employee per acre numbers. Because oftentimes what you're trying to do with the site needs argument, at least in a lot of the cities I've worked at, look at the opportunity for something that's different than what you have already. Your forecast in a lot of ways is retrospective. It's based on the kinds of industries that you've already got, and then how much growth you can reasonably justify. And there's lots of caveats to what reasonably means there. And so if site needs is a way of doing some aspirational planning that's different from the past, and you don't know the exact business that's going to land there, it's really hard to get to take some number of employment in your employment forecast and say, and boom, that's what it's going to be. So I'll give you an example. I've been talking to Prineville about their data centers for various reasons. And one of their data centers, I think the Facebook data center, had a big site, and I don't remember what size it was. Let's call it 200 acres. And they built a data center on it. And okay, they certainly at that point in time didn't need a 200 acre site for a data center. But now they've built 10 more buildings. And so there's a lot more employment, quite a few years later. And so these are some of the challenges and concerns when you're looking at a retrospective population forecast, employment forecast. You don't know exactly what business is going to locate there, and making that connection. It's really hard. So.
Thanks. I agree. It is a challenge, certainly. Jerry, please go ahead.
Sorry, I guess I'm just hoping for clarification on this. I don't have anything to bring to it outside of the fact that as a practitioner like Beth, I don't know where we need to do on this. If we're doing site plans, we're explaining it. I mean, we'll typically break it down to real estate product types and try to find the suitable sites and match that way. But we can just get some prototypical development forms and say, look, they make sense. They can be accommodated on these sites. We don't know if that's exactly what it's going to look like. And so the way it reads, I'm just not sure how to meet that criteria if I'm doing one of these. So
yeah. So it sounds like it would be helpful if we redraft this with more specific language about um, how a city might comply with this. Um, and I can bring that to you in a future draft. Um, I also, just in response to Beth's earlier comment about the employment growth forecast being sort of retrospective and then not necessarily knowing how things shape up, I think that's the nature with all employment forecasting. But what the department is trying to accomplish here is to say that if a land need is asserted through the target industries approach, then the employment growth forecast that the city is including in its economic opportunities analysis should be well connected to that. And it doesn't mean that we're asking cities to predict the future of exactly, to the body, how many workers are going to be on a site, but it does mean that if target industry growth is planned for, we should not just be planning for the land, we should also be planning for a reasonable estimate of additional workers in the community that are going to be occupying those places. So if there's a better way to do that, I would welcome your language suggestions. Allie, please go ahead.
Yeah, thanks for clarifying that, Leah. That was one of the questions I had about the kind of the intent of what these edits were looking at. I just put a comment out there for consideration of like employment growth over time. I think Beth was hitting on that a little bit with regards to like facilities expansion. Some of our target industries in Springfield are able to deliver more employees over time because they are successful here. And I don't know if that can be captured somehow, or if that is a consideration with regards to the relationship needed in the EOA.
Yeah, thanks. That's a good question. And this is probably a good point for me to clarify with 3 minutes remaining in our meeting that uh, using the target industries approach does not preclude a community from adjusting its employment growth forecast from a safe harbor source. Similarly, a city conducting an EOA does not have to use a target industries approach to make adjustments to its employment growth forecast. And that forecasting component is something that we have specifically been directed not to address through this rulemaking. So there are several ways that that a city can go about integrating however they would like to construct their local forecast into the method that they're using to assert land need. Gil, we have, I think, probably less than 1 minute left. Frederica, I'm sorry, we'll have to accept your comment written so that I can get to next steps.
I'll be quick, but one thing that Jerry reminded me of, and I think he was getting close to something. It's on this very bullet point here. I think the notion of as part of this requiring a master plan that shows the target industries and whatever the prototypical uh, layouts would be that could be associated with employment numbers for that particular one. Even though we know that master plan could be changed over time, at least there's some thought process gone into that projection landing on specific sites. And again, those prototypes may not be written into the rules. They may be available on your website to look at. And those could be tested by, a subsequent committee or whatever to do that work. Because I think that's what Jerry said was about the closest I can think of, because there's no perfect way to predict the future, nor is there a way to know whether, in fact, any of these target industries are actually going to take. But I think to assert the land need as an extraordinary measure, which this kind of target option is, I think doing some level of planning, and again, it's a high level master plan. It's not detailed, but it relates prototypical templates to the specific sites being talked about, and linking that back to the employment.
Okay, thank you, Gil. On the dot for noon, which is the end of our meeting, I'm going to skip this question and welcome written feedback. But I do want to provide next steps. So this slide is titled Instructions and Next Steps for Rules Advisory Committee members. Contains 4 bullet points. The important information for you is to consider and provide feedback that will inform a final draft of our rule amendment. DLCD is going to distribute meeting minutes and any requested follow-up materials next week. So please do take a look at those minutes, make sure that they are accurate to your experience and what you communicated to the department today. We're asking that any committee member that would like to have their written comments included in the Rulemaking Advisory Committee packet for our next meeting, get those written comments to DLCD by Friday, June 7th. And then finally, our next meeting is tentatively planned for sort of overlapping week and a half of July 1st through the 9th, which is a little bit later than we had originally anticipated. We will do our very best to not schedule days surrounding the 4th of July, but please look for a doodle poll to be sent out from Caesarea probably tomorrow or Monday, and give us a quick response on that so we can get that meeting set. And I just want to say thank you very much for your time today. Your expertise is really invaluable to this process, and I think we're getting much closer to a strong and solid rule that can clarify this this approach for communities. Gordon, do you have any closing comments that you'd like to add?
Well, I just want to thank everyone once again for your excellent input, all of you, on these questions. And we will hopefully, I don't know if we'll be able to write a rule that will satisfy every single one of all of your concerns, but we will do our best to integrate and meld those the issues you have brought forward into a rule that will work going forward for both local governments and others interested in industrial development and preservation of farmland and whatever other concerns or issues you have brought to us through this process. Thank you.
Thanks very much. We'll see you soon. Bye-bye.